Thank you very much, sir. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate being invited. We're going to talk about IT, and I can see I've already lost the room with eyes glazing over. Who wants to talk about computers at this hour of the day? But I will do my best to focus on the... Gotcha. I will do my best to try to stay out of the severely technical stuff and try to really keep it focused on the business side of the proposition. Again, if it has blinking lights, we can help. I'm going to try to really gloss over my company. It's not there as a sales tactic. It is there to give you some information as to our background and the expertise that we bring to the table. We do have a slightly different approach. We try very much to partner with our clients and very much bring a lot of different areas to the table than most companies, most IT consulting firms typically do. Most of them will deal generally with your computers, and that's it. We deal with access control, process control, security, telephone systems, postage meters, all that stuff that goes into making up the IT environment. Again, I don't want to dive into all the intricacies of this, but this just gives you an idea of the background and some of the areas that we hit in our services. If I talk about each one, I'll run as long as I did last time. One of the things that I see is a lot of business owners are faced with making decisions about technology, and that's not their forte, that's not their skill set. They're relying on their in-house technical person, and as a general rule, most technical people, myself included, suffer from the shiny bauble syndrome. We see a new piece of technology, we see something fun, oh, I want that, go to the boss and say, hey, we need this. Boss is in a horrible position. He does not know if this is required, if this is necessary. So one of the things that I would like to present to you is how to get an idea of what do you need to know as a boss without being a real technical person. How do you try to watch out for the bottom line, so to speak? First thing is to identify what you're managing. There's a lot of bosses that look at IT as strictly being the computer hardware. There's a whole lot more to it. And my goal is to instruct on applying what I call closed-loop management process, which basically looks at IT as a cyclical process rather than a straight-line progression towards here's the project, here's the goal, and we're done. Because usually once you get to that we're done point, it's a little bit late. You're already starting to get behind the power curve in some other areas. Top circle is consulting, which is the before the sale. Getting advice from the professionals on exactly what you need, why you need it, doing some education. The second one to the right is sales, actually purchasing the hardware. The third one is implementation, that's installing the equipment, providing the services. And then the last one is support. And unfortunately, in most companies, that's a straight line, not a circle. They're missing that very last arrow that goes from support back to consulting. Because once a project is installed, be it a new software application, be it some new hardware for a given process, by going through the first 3 steps and getting all this stuff installed and running, there are data points along the way that you want to be mindful of as to, okay, now that we've got this stuff installed, is it working? What are the shortcomings? What does this application not do that we didn't think of? All of that stuff needs to be fed back around so that Rev 2, when you start going back and readdressing the problem later, that you can take these things into account. Why employ it? Those are very self-explanatory. Controlling costs, making better technology choices, enhancing your business. IT should definitely be something that is a part of your success model rather than, gee, we're in business, we have to have some computers. Trouble signs. If there's too many emergencies as a manager, if you see almost every other day or at least once a week there is some IT emergency, chances are closed loop management is not being applied correctly. Work stoppages, if a single computer in your organization goes down and that causes you to stop producing revenue or stop a client's work, something has not been designed right at the outset. You've got a single point of failure there. Also, one of the key signs is if these things are happening and as a manager you don't know why these things are happening. Or like I mentioned before, you're being asked to make a purchase. So the first key goal that I mentioned was to identify your IT resources. Here I've given a list of the things that I believe should be included in any plan to address that. There are certain areas of these that you'll notice the business owners out there that I think a lot of people forget and leave out. Obviously, there's the computer hardware, which most people are acutely aware of. Backups, which many people are not acutely aware of. There's some horror stories there. Premise wiring, that's all the wiring that goes throughout your building. That is the foundation of all of the IT equipment in your operation and is often neglected. It's kind of hard to run really fast when you've got mushy ground, and that's what your cable infrastructure can wind up being. The network connectivity itself, the internet, all your office equipment. A lot of times people leave out the telephone system and don't consider that part of IT. It is now. Used to, telephone systems were very proprietary. They're not. Now most telephone systems are in fact nothing more than a computer, and they tend to fall in the purview of the IT resources. A media library, that is actually an asset of the company in that it encompasses all of these software applications, configurations, data sheets. Whenever you buy a new computer and you get a data sheet of exactly what's in it, all of these things go together to be your media library so that as a company, there's tax implications for that, but certainly you want to make sure that you have all that stuff on hand. I can't tell you how many lost hours and dollars that I have seen companies pay because they have a consultant come in to rescue a computer and the first thing the IT guy says is, where's your disks? Where's your operating system disk? Where's your copy of Office? They don't have it, and all of a sudden they're looking at another bill. So a media library is something that's often overlooked and very critical in reducing costs. Your email services, your company website, of course. Physical security for the building, that's another thing that gets left off quite frequently that people don't think about. Disaster recovery, again, one that's often forgotten. And your support services to maintain that IT infrastructure. So all of these things are things that you should consider when you're trying to identify exactly what are you managing, what are you responsible for if you're in charge of IT. I'm going to try to blow through each one of these very quickly. I basically took each item on the previous slide and did some expansion of it. I'm going to let you guys kind of read it and try to just hit the high points. The computer hardware is the most obvious part of your IT infrastructure. When you are selecting that, the biggest point that I need to make there is people will tend to go out and buy big, high-end horsepower systems. Don't do that. Go out and look at the software that you want to run first. Find out what software you want to run, what its requirements are, and purchase the computer that's dictated by that software rather than just going to Best Buy, Micro Center and buying what's on the shelf. As a general rule, if you overspend in the hardware area and then find out 6 months, a year down the road, you've added additional applications that require more horsepower, they're going to be cheaper then. Even 6 months later, chances are any hardware assets that you have to purchase are going to be cheaper 6 months, a year down the road than overbuying up front. Some of the things you obviously want to make sure that you have on your systems for the desktop side, and again, that's driven by the software requirements. Servers, one thing you should always ask as a small business, do you even need a server? It depends on the company and the nature of their business, but I think a fair rule of thumb is if you have less than 5 employees, less than 5 desktops, chances are you don't need a server. There's peer-to-peer networking that is designed to function well in that environment, and you don't need the cost of it. There are particularly security concerns that even if you are less than 5 people, you may want to go ahead and get a server if security is an issue. I'm thinking like investment advisors, companies related to financial matters. Hardware requirements, your geeks will come up and say, we've got RAID 1 or RAID 5 backup, so we're covered. We'll hit that later. And then how many servers? There are far too many companies that are in a position where they do need servers and they get one server and stuff every single application on that one machine. Very similar analogy to you're putting all your eggs in one basket. If that server goes down, your email's down, your database is down, your login capability is down, on and on and on. So there are some very good reasons to avoid future lost productivity by breaking up your applications that you run onto physically separate machines. Backups, the RAID 1.5 myth. Again, there's a lot of folks, business owners that I talk to that say, oh, our server has RAID, so we're covered in the event of a failure. RAID is great for duplicating your data on one machine on 2 hard drives internal to the machine. So if you have a hard drive failure, which moving part mechanical, that's the most frequent failure mode. If that fails, you have another drive that still has all the data on it and you keep right on running. So the downfall of that is that RAID is equally capable of replicating deletions. So if you delete a file, it's going to be very efficient about deleting that file on the other hard drive, and that doesn't fit the paradigm of a backup. So a lot of people think of RAID solution as disaster recovery or a backup. In fact, it is meant strictly for disaster recovery, not for backup purposes. If you need to recover a file that was deleted 3 days ago, you better have something else other than just RAID 1 or 5 on your server. Backups should be done both local and off-site in case there's fire, flood, natural disaster, act of God. A SAN is a approach that many companies will look to for backing up. A SAN is basically a completely separate computer, if you will, that does nothing but store the data. Removes that from the server that's running your applications. It also makes backup easier because it's a central point where all your data resides. Most people will back up their server. Many people don't remember to back up the desktops. Depending on your environment, there can be some arguments made for not backing up desktops. If absolutely everything is located on the server and you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if the receptionist computer goes down that it's not going to impact your business, don't back up your desktops. But if you have somebody that has QuickBooks on their desktop and they're storing the database locally, I'd highly advise that that be one of your choices. Premise wiring. I'm going to try to shorten that. Premise wiring is all of the network cabling that goes around in your building. There's a lot of companies that say don't bother with premise wiring, do everything wireless. That's a bad idea for a couple of reasons we'll get into later. You always want at least wired connectivity. Wireless is an option depending on the nature of your business. But I can't tell you how many times I see wiring that's been done in a building and where the wire comes into either the central location where all your wiring comes together or in the individual drops around your office, they have a wire coming out of the wall. And that plugs into their computer. Well, you need to have jacks there, and on the other end have jacks and use patch panels for the simple reason that most of that wiring has specifications for bend radius so that wires don't get broke from, inside the cable from being moved over time. So spend the extra money to actually have a patch panel put in. If you're moving into a new building that already has wiring, I highly recommend that you have a proficient cable company come in and actually test the wire and certify it, because it will create the most obnoxiously expensive problems down the road that are very, very difficult to troubleshoot when they start rearing their ugly head. Network. Please invest in a business class router. Don't go to Best Buy and buy a Netlink and try to run your business off of it. That may get you through the first 6 months, but invariably you will probably find things as your business grows that you want to do that those consumer class devices don't support. In addition, there is a mean time between failure issue where most of your consumer gear is not meant to be powered on and running all the time, and I kind of suspect that most people view their company as something that is running all the time. I won't go through all of those technical details. Switches, when you are out looking for switches, which is kind of the glue that plugs everything together in your network, make sure the keyword to look for when you do go shopping for those is quality of service and management capabilities. They probably cost an extra $50, $100, but if you guys ever start getting into voice over IP or doing some fancy segmenting on your network, you will find that you wish you had one of those. Wireless devices, most common issue that I see when a company goes into wireless is broadcasting on that network to every other company in the subdivision, who they are, this is our equipment, here's how you get into our network. So make sure that you don't use a descript broadcast string, or make sure your consultant does not do that when they set it up, and use strong passwords. I would bet there's a very large percentage of networks you can get into by using the word password or 1234. That's pretty much the common ones that are everywhere, and everybody who's trying to get into your networks knows that. Wireless, another thing that I have seen people make mistakes on is they use a wireless network because it saves them money on the wired infrastructure, and wireless is inherently a poor choice for voice over IP, and more companies are using telephones that are voice over IP based, which runs across your network cabling well, but it does not run across wireless well. So don't try to do wireless with telephones. Internet, some of the things that you can look for when your company goes out looking for internet services. Basically, you've got three choices, DSL, cable, and dedicated circuits. I've thrown up some of the pros and cons of each one there. I'm not a fan of DSL for the reasons that are listed up here. Cable or T1s and T3s tend to give most companies the best reliability and bang for the buck on speed. The biggest difference between the two is speed between cable and T1s and T3s, and they're diametrically opposed. Your cost is the one side and your speed is the other, and that's the big determining factor between the two. With one thing that I should throw out there, on dedicated circuits like T1 and T3 circuits that you would get for internet access for your company, those do have a federally mandated response time. If that circuit goes down and you ordered it from AT&T, you call AT&T, they have to respond in 4 hours, period. If they don't, you can get a hold of the FCC. They will come back and tell AT&T they cannot sell those circuits anymore because they have so many violations of response time. Whereas with cable service and certainly with DSL, if you call up Charter, they're not mandated to respond or do anything in a particularly cost-effective time frame. When you go out looking for an ISP, take note of some of those factors there. A lot of people make that decision based on cost. When you consider the amount of your business that depends on internet these days, don't let cost be your determining factor. I would suggest that the best thing to do is call them up and ask for their support department. That's the #1 test before you select an ISP. See if you get through to a person right away. What is your wait time? The person that you get on the phone, do they seem to know what they're talking about? Those are really the key things. Because whenever you have a problem nowadays in business with your internet service, it's critical. You know it, you're down, you need help right away. You don't want to suffer delays there. Office equipment, again, another area that a lot of people don't think seems to fall under IT, but certainly does, particularly these days, the way that the technology has progressed. Even down to your postage meters, which are internet-connected devices these days, scanners for the desktop, and faxing services. More and more people I'm seeing, I actually do it myself in my business, have gone to online faxing services. It saves an awful lot of cost over that silly thermal paper from the old days of fax machines. Your telephone system, again, more and more companies are looking at voice over IP instead of what we call POTS, which is plain old telephone service. It's the typical, phone service that most of us grew up with and are aware of. When you're choosing a VoIP provider, I would suggest that your #1 criteria is reference word of mouth. There's a lot of fairly technical issues involved in that, so the best way that I can put it to you is find somebody who's using it, talk to them, see if they're happy with them. That is your #1 key to know if you've got a good voice over IP provider. Some things to be aware of when companies are coming out and pushing VoIP to you. It does not do faxing well, and in most cases does not do faxing at all. You still have to have a regular POTS line or hard landline to do faxing. Another thing to be aware of is voice over IP is cheaper. That's why most companies are going with it these days. But the downside is, again, the idea of putting all your eggs in one basket. Your business already depends on the internet. Well, in the voice over IP case, when your internet service goes down, now you're also without telephone service. So again, there can be a case made for keeping the old-fashioned service as well. Asterisk is one of the common voice over IP phone systems out there. That's the one that you'll probably see the most outside of a proprietary system. I already mentioned the media library, why that is so critical. Again, finding all your license keys and media, you will save the cost of setting the library up ahead of time many, many times over in consulting fees. Again, whenever a computer fails, you have a technician come out there, or you take your laptop into a consulting firm to have some work done on it. Almost universally, most of the problems require them to have the CDs that originally came with it. If you don't find them, you're looking at purchasing that again, or perhaps going with some gray market stuff, or borrowing your friend's media, and there are certainly problems. As a matter of fact, I think it was just about 2 or 3 months ago I heard of another St. Louis company that got an SPA audit and failed, and you're unfortunately in a very expensive scenario there of paying the SPA off to say, I'm sorry. Again, drivers, all the CDs that come with your computers, make absolutely sure that these are all kept in one central location. I suggest that companies have a check-in process whenever a new system is bought. A lot of times somebody in one department will go out and buy a computer. The people who are maintaining the media library never know about it, and sure enough, that's the one that's going to fail when you need to go out and find your CD. Again, whenever a system is sold, You want to have some mechanism to get the media and documentation for that system out of your media library. Otherwise, I, as the consultant, come in and I see 30 CDs for Dell, all different versions. I don't know which one goes with that machine. Make it easy on yourself. That saves the time, which is the dollars you're paying the consultant. Also, strongly suggest that periodically you go through and audit this to make sure that you have the original manufacturer CDs, the Microsoft Office CDs, the Windows CDs, everything that you're supposed to have for those systems. Again, the SPA is just making a killing going through all companies, but certainly in St. Louis it's happening where companies are getting audited and failing those audits because they don't have proof of license. Email, obviously, something that falls in the arena of IT. You've got two choices for email, basically. Most solutions will fall into a category of you're running the email in-house. You have your own server where your email is hosted, hopefully on a separate machine than is running your QuickBooks. If it's internal, there's maintenance costs certainly associated with that. You're paying an employee to maintain the server. Security can be something that you have to weigh on the internal versus outsourced, all of these. Security is another issue. In many companies, it's no problem having an internal IT guy maintain your mail servers. In many companies, they don't want the IT guy having access to everybody's email necessarily, particularly if he's an employee. There is a real argument to be made of taking your email services and outsourcing them to an outside company for security issues as well. And then, of course, there's the cost of whatever the internal IT guy costs versus, your monthly cost of having your email hosted elsewhere. Domain name registration, I'm not going to go through that in detail, but one of my other companies is a web hosting provider. We host websites for companies out there, and it is unfortunately not the rarest thing in the world that they will go out and register their domain name, put it all in their name, we have no knowledge of it, we don't bill them for it, and they forget to pay the bill and they lose their domain name. I have seen that happen to companies. Your domain name is an asset these days. It's a branding thing. And if that just suddenly gets taken away from you with no recourse to get it back, it can be a very, very painful process. So one of the things I would definitely recommend to every business owner is immediately go back and check who holds the registration, where are the bills getting sent. If it's your internet provider, if it's your web developer, it doesn't really matter who's doing it as long as you know that somebody is doing it. You don't want to lose that asset. Your website, many companies have gone down the route of a static website that does not change. You are actually turning people away from your website when you do that. If it's static, they're not going to come back. They may see your website once. You need a website that changes all the time. You really should have someone in your organization, whether it's your marketing people, your HR people, or even executives. Somebody's got to do it. Make sure that the website content is fresh. Make sure that it's changing. That's the only way you're going to get people to come back to it. How to select a hosting company, that's an important issue. Again, my #1 criteria for that is talk to people, talk to other business owners, and find somebody who has the reputation. Because I've seen an awful lot of really, really large hosting companies do a really, really poor job of support or reliability and stability, and I have seen the opposite. I've seen some very small companies that are just the epitome of customer service. So you really don't want to just think, oh, big name. Talk to friends, find somebody that they know does a good job from past experience. Physical security, again, years ago, this was not really in the purview of IT because it was proprietary systems that were very much standalone. That's no longer true. Most of your security stuff, door control, access control, intrusion detection, all that stuff is now standard commodity off-the-shelf IT stuff. It has to play on your company network, and your IT person needs to be aware of it. If you do choose to have it done by a third party instead of in-house, always, always, always get your IT person or your consultant that you've retained to get together whenever those folks come out to install the system. Same thing for voice over IP. Because they are integrated, you will have all kinds of problems where one system will step on the other. Disaster recovery is one of the biggest ones that most companies don't ever seem to plan for, and it's one of those things where just an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There are some things that you should consider when formulating your company's disaster recovery plan, at least in the IT arena. The #1 thing is plan not to have the disaster in the first place. Make sure that you're using your backups. Make sure that you have redundant disk drives, the mirroring that I mentioned earlier. Make sure that you have the plan in place ahead of time will also help in that. Another key thing is, as you're determining what are the components of your disaster recovery plan, look at the time frame that you want, because that's very, very different from one company to the next. There are some companies out there who will say, we're very happy if we're down for 3 days and we can't get everything up in another location, you know, in a week, and then we're good. There's other companies, 1 day is not acceptable. So how you develop that plan and what items you put in your disaster recovery plan certainly depends, first and foremost, on what is your horizon that you can sustain being down. That has a direct bearing on the expense of implementing the plan, of course. Obviously, assess the critical applications, the ones that your business cannot do without. Disaster recovery, of course, a key component of that is your backup and recovery procedures. You need to have written documentation on your disaster recovery plan. How is it implemented? Who does what? When a disaster is called by the president of the company, each person needs to have their job, their specific punch list of here's who's going to do what. And lastly, schedule regular tests. That is related to your backups. I can't tell you how many companies do backups and something goes wrong with a backup process and they're not actively trying to restore the data from those backups once in a while. And as a result, when the disaster happens, that's when they find out their backups are bad. There's something that was skipped on it. So by actually having regular tests of pulling your data off your backups, that's how you're going to know, is my disaster recovery plan sane? Support. That's the people who make it all run. You can do that 2 ways, in-house or outsourced. You can hire an IT guy full-time on staff. You can outsource it to another company. That's a choice to make that has a cost. And typically, I'm sure it's not true in all situations, but it typically has a cost versus expertise is the balancing act that you're paying for there. On-demand versus contract. There are lots of IT companies, Best Buy Geek Squad comes to mind, that they will come out and help you when there's a problem, and that's it. That might get you through the problem, but it pretty well violates the tenet of everything that I've been trying to present, of trying to have some continuity, trying to see what's going on and address those problems for the next cycle through. With your on-demand stuff, the issue that you typically run into is every time they send somebody out, it's a different guy. It's going to cost you more up front because the new guy that comes out is going to spend a half hour trying to figure out, okay, what are you doing on this machine? What software is on it? What did I do last time this problem occurred? When you have a contracted support organization, yes, it has more of a cost to it, at least short-term costs, certainly not long-term, but generally you're going to get the same guy, or they're going to assign a team of people to you so that they can share the information and save you some money in that regard. How to select a support company, my view, certainly based on the closed-loop management process, is that when you engage an outside consulting firm, I would suggest that you look for somebody that is willing to work on a retainer basis as opposed to an hourly basis. You can look at this as very much like buying an insurance policy for your information technology in your company. You are paying a set monthly fee, but if something happens, you're covered. Now, some companies will offer a retainer arrangement that is a certain number of hours. Depending on the company, most times our retainer agreements are carte blanche, unlimited. Whatever you need, as much as you need. If you have a disaster and we have to be out there for 3 weeks, doesn't matter, you're still paying the same monthly amount. If you can find a company that will entertain that type of relationship, you're certainly going to have somebody who is more interested in looking at your stuff and making sure that it doesn't fail. Again, like an insurance adjuster that wants to try to minimize you having the accident in the first place, if your consulting firm is getting paid a lower rate monthly, but they can bank on it, they're going to have it in their best interest to try to maintain your systems proactively ahead of time so there's not a failure, so they're not eating a week of time, you know, when that expense arises. So, summary, your closed-loop management process. Again, most companies view that as a straight linear progression from consulting through sales to implementation and stops there. The support piece is key. A lot of companies view that as just out of the picture, a side thing. But we believe that the support sphere, what that's allowing you to do as an owner is go back and look at your support stuff. look at what's happening. What are the problems that people are reporting? And then turn that into the next phase where you go back and address some of these issues rather than letting the users deal with some inefficiencies in the process as it was originally designed. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.